Kill a Mockingbird, Chapter 1. So I gave you a worksheet to fill out, and the worksheet should guide you through your reading so that you are noticing the things that I think are important, okay? And to just kind of make you pause and think about what's going on in the chapter and to keep track of what's happening. So when I do these videos for each chapter, I'm going to go over the things that are important that I want to touch on that you should have gotten from the chapter and just kind of break down the chapter, same way that I do when I'm teaching, okay? So I might not answer all the questions that are on your worksheets. And if you have questions on your worksheets that didn't get answered, you have a couple of options. Number one, talk to your friends. See what they came up with. See what they thought. Number two, you can email me and ask me. Number three, we're having a live Google Meet tomorrow. That's your time to ask me questions that didn't get answered for you, okay? So tomorrow's Google Meet runs from 8 to 12. You have to pop in at some time. If you have questions, that's when you can ask them. If you don't have questions, you still need to come and say hi to me, okay? So, Chapter 1. These are the things that I want to make sure that you caught on to. Can't get my paper pen. Oh, I have 2 pages of notes. Yeehaw. Okay, so the first thing you need to understand is that the book opens with an adult narrator. The narrator's name is Scout. So on your paper, Chapter 1 notes, I asked you to explain the following characters, and that's so that you can keep people straight. So I'm going to give you some details on these people. That's where you could write it down. You might also want to have your notebook open so that you can handwrite notes while I'm talking to you on each of the chapters. So Scout is your narrator, and the very first line of the book is, when Jim was 13, he got his arm badly broken at the elbow. If that's the first line of the book, and you have an adult who's commenting on an activity that happened before, essentially that's what this book is about. It's about what led up to Jem's accident of getting his arm broken. Okay? She says that when enough years had gone by for them to look at it and talk about it, so now that they're adults, she says that the Yules started it. So I do not have the Yules on your paper yet. You just need to hold on to that name. All right? We'll get to them, but that's what Scout thinks is what caused the whole problem. So Jem's comment is that, no, it began the summer that Dill came to us. So we've got 2 events that have been mentioned. Jem's arm gets broken when he's nearly 13, and Dill came to them. That means you've got 2 important events. So you should know what happened for those, okay? So then you go from page 3 to page 5 with a lot of family history. I told you on Tuesday with the video that, this is the most boring part of the book. Just slog through it. You basically learned about the Finch family, where their ancestors had come from. Sorry, I keep looking this way because the doors are over there and my dog is sitting outside the doors wondering why I won't let him in. But he's a pain during videos. So you learn about the Finch family, and essentially old Simon Finch, he settled along the river and he started a cotton plantation. And it was very successful, very wealthy. That was in the time of the slaves. Okay? Once the disruption or they usually don't even call it a war, but they talk about it being a disruption or a problem or the conflict, that kind of thing. So basically, when the war is over, he keeps the people who used to be his slaves, he keeps them on as servants. Simon Finch is a good man, all right? He's not the kind of white plantation owner that was cruel to his slaves. He's not the kind of person, he's not the kind of man or family that is has this racial tension. He's a good Christian white man. So the Finch family, they're white, okay? And they were wealthy. So then you learn about the kids that are born. Basically, there's 3 kids. You had, Simon had Atticus, John, can't think of her name. And Aunt, I'll get to it. Anyway, there's 3 kids that are born. So Atticus goes on to become a lawyer. John goes on to become a doctor, and Atticus pays a lot of his way to become a doctor. And Aunt, why can I not think of her name? Aunt Alexandra, of course. Aunt Alexandra still lives on the plantation. Okay, the plantation at this time in the 1930s, you learned about the stock market crash. You learned about how people are like struggling big time. The plantation is surviving, and it makes enough money to be able to support Aunt Alexandra and her husband. But other than that, there's not much else. So Atticus and John are on their own. All right, being a lawyer and a doctor and white, they were actually both pretty well off before the stock market crash. So there's going to be some comments from the kids to Atticus. Are we poor? And you're going to see some of that social hierarchy stuff as we get into the next chapters. Understand that Atticus and the kids are considered the upper class white people. They're not super rich, maybe not upper class. Let's put them to middle class. Atticus and the kids are a lot like most of us, where we've got enough money to be able to survive on, but things are kind of tough, okay? Where you can pay the bills and you've got a little bit of extra to live off of, but you're not doing anything extravagant, okay? So that's your family history. On page 5, we shift our narrator. And that shift happens at the little, there's just a little bit bigger space right here. Okay, so the rest of it was all this adult narrator telling, what their history was. But all of a sudden right here, Scout changes into going back to when she was 5 years old. And now she's going to tell the story as this 5-year-old, she's almost 6, and what happens to them. Remember yesterday or Tuesday, I talked about how Go Set a Watchman was published, and it was said that it was the sequel to Kill a Mockingbird, and actually it wasn't. It was actually the first draft of To Kill a Mockingbird. This is the kind of thing that her editor said, you need to make these kids the ones that tell the story. So she went back and made the story from the viewpoint of the kids. All right, so here we're going to shift to it being Scout. I think that's why I love this book so much, because now Scout is going to tell a story, and I think that Harper Lee did such a great job with making it sound like it's actually being told by a kid. I know a lot of you don't like to read, and I'm telling you that if you give this book a chance and just look at it as funny and humorous and quirky, that you'll like it. It's told by Scout, and she says funny things. It's all about the superstitions and the things that kids do. And maybe you can't relate to it because you've grown up with phones and video games and all this kind of stuff. But when I was a kid, this was the kind of stuff that we did. We played outside. We made up games. We acted out skits. When I was little and we lived on the lake, we used to use one of the man's Merlin was his name. We used his pontoon, and 6 girls that lived on this lake, we would put the pontoon, take it out into the water a little bit, and that was our stage. And we would make all the people from the neighborhood, our parents and the other people that lived on the lake, would come and sit in Merlin's yard and watch us perform these things. Like, they were horrible. We didn't know the actual true stories. We just performed these things. I was little. I was only like 6, 7 years old. The only one that I even faintly remember is that we did Peter Pan and I was Tinkerbell. And all I remember, I didn't have any lines. All I did was, in my little pink bathing suit, I just jumped around like I was a fairy with a wand. And, I was just sprinkling fairy dust on people with my wand. We would charge our families in the neighborhood to come and watch these horrible plays of us out on this pontoon boat. And we did that because voices carry over the water. But I was like 6. That means my sister, being the oldest one, she was only 11. So this is what we did. We acted out stuff. And yeah, we charged them. We charged them like $0.25 for everyone to come to our play. And then with that money, my mom would take us to McDonald's to maybe get a Happy Meal, because that was like a huge treat. Or we went to a place called the Slip and Slide with our money. And that's how one of the ways that we earned money. So when there's this talk of the kids acting out these stories, it's completely real. All right. On page 5, you get Scout giving you a lot of allusions to what you learned about the 1930s. On the bottom of page 5, she says, "There was no hurry, for there was nowhere to go, nothing to buy, and no money to buy it with. Nothing to see outside the boundaries of Macomb County. But it was a time of vague optimism for some people. Macomb County had recently been told that it had nothing to fear but fear itself." What's the allusion? What is she referencing? She's referencing the 1930s and how horrible the economy was, how there was no money, nothing to buy, no money to buy it with. People didn't have jobs, so there was nowhere to go. And then she leaves you with that line, "We had nothing to fear but fear itself." You should recognize that from what we've already talked about. That was FDR's big line during his inaugural speech. That's what he told the people in his speech. "You have nothing to fear but fear itself." And she's referencing that. Okay, so she's setting the scene for this book of what life was like. People are poor, people are struggling, and it's really bad. All right. So she goes on to tell you about her family life. And this is all the exposition of the story, right? When we have our plot diagram that we studied in first semester, and at the very beginning, it was the exposition where you get the setting and the characters. So she tells you about the setting. They lived in town. Atticus is a lawyer. Professional people usually lived in town. So the first thing you get is Atticus. And so on your worksheet, it would be check number 4. Atticus is the father. I hope you notice that they call him Atticus. She doesn't say, "I'm going to tell Dad." She says, "I'm going to tell Atticus," right? They call him Atticus. And the description of him on page 6 was, "Jem and I found our father satisfactory. He played with us, read to us, and treated us with courteous detachment." That's not how most parents would be described. So Atticus is super nice. Atticus is very kind to them. He plays with them. He reads with them. He's kind as in courteous. Detachment is they're held a little bit off. Atticus isn't that nurturing, lovey-dovey dad. He is, he's a dad in the 1930s. Fathers at this time usually went to work. Mothers were in the household. So he's not that nurturing type guy. He's really nice, and they like him. They love him. He's their dad. But he's not that lovey-dovey dad, okay? In fact, he kind of treats them like they're adults, just smaller. That's how he is. You should also know in your worksheet, you could fill out that Jem is her older brother. He's 4 years older. When it says he's 4 years my senior, that's what it means. When she starts talking here on page 6, when Dill comes to them, Jem is 9, almost 10, and Scout, who is our narrator, is 5, almost 6. Okay? They meet Dill. Dill is, and I already told you that the Finch family, that's Scout and Jem, their last name is Finch, so is Atticus. They are white. So Dill comes to stay with his Aunt Rachel, who is a neighbor of the Finches. Aunt Rachel is white. Dill is white. Dill is, I think he's almost 7. He's really, really small for his age. And what he represents in this book is a huge imagination. He makes up the craziest stories. His mind is just nuts. Like the things that he makes up, the lies that he creates, the stories that he creates are just crazy. And the thing about him, that you learn in this chapter is that he can't stop thinking about Boo Radley. Okay, I'll come back to him. You also learned about Calpurnia, and Scout says that she was their cook. She's more than their cook. All right, Calpurnia has been with them since Jem was born. Jem was born the first year that Atticus and his wife got married, and then 4 years later, Scout was born. Her mom dies of a sudden heart attack when she's 2 years old. She doesn't remember her mother at all. She was only 2. However, Jem was 6, and Jem remembers his mom. And there's times where they'll be in the middle of playing, and all of a sudden he'll just kind of wander off and just want to be left alone. And those are the times where he's remembering his mom. Okay, so even as a 6-year-old, he still remembers her. It's been, 3, almost 4 years since she died, and he's still mourning her. My mom's up. He's still mourning her death. He misses her terribly, and okay, that's where that's at. So Calpurnia came to them as their cook and kind of a nanny when Jem was born, and she's still with them now, almost 10 years later. Calpurnia is black. Calpurnia is not a slave, okay? She is a servant. She is someone who is a paid employee of the Finches. She's their cook, she's their nanny, she's their housekeeper. She does everything around their house, but she doesn't live there. At night, she goes and walks home to where the black people live. Remember, separate but equal. So the Finches live in this nice house in town. Calpurnia lives in basically a shack outside of town in the black settlement. All right. She comes into town early, and works for the Finches all day long. And sometimes it's so late when Atticus gets home that he drives her home. But usually she walks home. That's enough for now. Except, please notice that it says that Calpurnia always won when she and Scout fought. And it's not that she fought with Scout, but she disciplined Scout. And Scout would be like, that's not fair, blah, blah, whatever. But Atticus always took Calpurnia's side. So if Calpurnia said, Scout was bad today, she did this, that, and the other thing, Atticus would take Calpurnia's word for it. This is different in this time period, that Atticus would side with a black woman over his white child. That's your first clue that Atticus is different than many white people in this time period. All right, so she gave you her boundaries, and really she's giving you the full setting of this, and I want to draw these boundaries for you because they're super important for you to be able to picture what's happening in the rest of the book. So essentially, this is town up here, okay? The downtown district, and I don't know, you can't see this very well, and I'm really sorry. I'll try to pull it forward more because I want you to draw this, okay? So up here you have downtown. So this is where the post office is. This is where Atticus's lawyer office is. This is where the stores are, the hardware store, the grocer, all that kind of stuff is up here in town. All right. The Finch children, their road kind of goes like this. Okay. I'm drawing the sidewalk is really what I'm drawing. All right, that's the sidewalk. So if you wanted to, you could draw the other side over here. And I guess it goes like this. We'll give them a sidewalk. Okay, so this is the road right here. Don't get confused. Now, she tells you that their boundaries to the north were Mrs. Dubos's house. So we're going to put a house right here. And we're going to label this as Mrs. Dubose. You're going to meet Mrs. Dubose later, but she is an old lady. She yells things at them. She's really, really mean. And Scout even says that going past Mrs. Dubose's was hell. And this is coming from a 5-year-old. She was just so mean that they didn't want to go down there. And Mrs. Dubose was 2 houses to the north of the Finches. So the Finches live here. Okay, we'll put a star on their house. That's where the kids live. Then you have their southern boundary was the Radley place. And it said that the Radleys were 3 houses to the south. And the reason this is curved out is because there's a big tree right here. So you can put the tree there. Across the street, I'm just going to give you this information. It might not have been in the book, but across the street, this is Miss Maudie. Miss Maudie lives over there. She rents out the top floor of her house to the teacher, that kind of thing. So in the book, the one thing that I don't like about it is there's a couple of details that are mixed up a little bit. In one place, it says that Miss Rachel's house, where Dill stays, is right here to the north. In another place in the book, it says that Miss Rachel's house is here to the south on the way to the Radleys. So I'm just going to put Miss Rachel right here. And the importance of Miss Rachel is that that's where Dill lives. So when he comes to stay for the summers, it's awesome because now they have this best friend that's living right next door. Okay? She also talks about how over here, this is where the school is. I'm kind of out of room. Okay? And the schoolyard butts right up to the Radleys. So there's a big thing of trees in here, and it's called Deer Forest. The school's right on the edge of that. And the Radleys, they have a gate that goes all the way around their property. All right? And on the schoolyard, there's a big tree right here. And you'll get more details about this tree, but I just want to get things in your mind about where they are. But even in this section of the book, she talks about how if a ball was hit from the schoolyard into the Radley lot, it was a lost ball. Nobody went to get it. If they have a tree on their lot also, it's a pecan tree, and if it drops pecans into the schoolyard right here, you don't eat them because Radley pecans, they're poisonous. They'll kill you. Superstition from the kids. All right. Whatever's going on here at the Radley house is creepy. The Radley house is terrifying. There's somebody that lives in there that is so scary that they're terrified. Just the mention of that entity scares them. Okay. So this is where they're allowed to go. Basically this one block, and all of that is within calling distance of Calpurnia. She can open the door and yell, "Kids!" and they should be able to hear her. They can go from here down to here, play in all the neighbors' yards, except the Radleys. When they go to school, they leave their house, they walk down the sidewalk, and they go here. There's one point where, we'll get to it, but it talks about the kids, how they pass the Radley place every day, and Jem tries to say that he's not scared of it because he goes past it every day. All right, so that gets you that. We talked about Dill already. I'm getting there. We're almost done. So the story of Boo Radley. Boo Radley's real name is Arthur Radley, and essentially what happened was, as a teenager, he got mixed up with the wrong crowd. One night they got in some huge trouble. They stole a flivver, which is a kind of truck, you can think of it. The sheriff chases them, doesn't catch them. Basically, the sheriff gives up the chase. He goes back to town and he goes into the outhouse. So he needs to go to the bathroom. And while he's in the outhouse, the boys, I think there's 4 of them that were together, these teenage boys, they flipped over the outhouse. So if an outhouse is for pooping and peeing, there's a bucket in there probably at this time. It's not going to be like a nice porta potty. It's going to be a nasty thing with probably just a bucket. And when they tip it over, all the contents that were in there are going to tip over too. So the sheriff is furious, and he is out to get these kids. It's one thing to steal a truck and get away, but to get him covered in poop, he's mad, So he goes after these kids, he catches them, and he convicts them. And the town, for a while, the kids are put into the basement jail. And then the town says, we're going to send these kids to basically a reform school. They're going to go and learn a trade so that they can get a job. We're going to make good citizens out of them. Mr. Radley, remember the guy that lives here? Mr. Radley feels like this is an embarrassment. And he's not going to have his kids sent to the reform school because that is just not okay. And so he says, you give him to me. I'll take care of him and he won't cause any more trouble. Arthur goes home with his dad and he's never seen again. It's been like 30 years. This guy's still inside. Maybe it's not 30 years. 15 years? I don't know. It's like 15 years and this guy has never come out again. Ever. Hasn't come out of his house. So use your imagination, because the kids sure do, about what Mr. Radley must do to keep Arthur inside. And so at this time, his nickname becomes Boo, because he is like a ghost. He's like a legend. He's like a story. And the stories sure do get made up about him. All right. So over here also, add to your map Miss Maudie's, but over here you want to add Miss Stephanie. Miss Stephanie is the town gossip. If she doesn't have a story to tell, she'll make one up. And if she does have a story to tell, she'll make it better. So she exaggerates her stories. She's the one that knows everything that's going on around the town, and she is very happy to share her knowledge with everyone. So she's the town gossip. All right. So let's see. Mr. Radley, he's not a nice man. He finally dies, and there's a huge scene on page 12 when they carry Mr. Radley's body past the Finch house. The kids and Calpurnia are on the porch, and Calpurnia, she spits into the bushes, and she says, "There goes the meanest man God ever blew breath into." This line, it seems like it's just a small thing, but I'm telling you that Harper Lee put a lot of thought into everything that is said in this book, because that line means a lot. It does two main things. Number one, it characterizes Calpurnia, because she says it on page 12. I want to get the exact words. "There goes the meanest man ever God blew breath into," murmured Calpurnia, and she spat meditatively into the yard. We looked at her in surprise, for Calpurnia rarely commented on the ways of white people. Did you catch that? Calpurnia, their black cook, rarely comments on the ways of white people. That statement means Calpurnia knows her place. It's not okay for a black person to make comments about how a white person lives, but the whites can say all they want about the black people. I hope you catch my sarcasm in that. That's not okay. Calpurnia knows that that is the way that it is. She knows that that is the social rule. She knows that she is in a place of the whites, and she knows that she is not allowed to make comments about the way that they live. But she does this time. So first of all, this section is characterization for Calpurnia. She's black and she knows her place. And I hate that statement, but that's what it is. It also does characterization about Mr. Radley, because if Calpurnia is willing to speak out against a white, he must have been really, really bad. There goes the meanest man God ever blew breath into. He was one mean man. Okay? So page 13, you get into the kids' superstitions. They're talking about Boo Radley. Jem he's the oldest one. He's almost 10. Dill's 7, and Scout is 5, almost 6. And so Jem is the source of information. And his source of information is Miss Stephanie Crawford. So he says, Dill says, I wonder what he does in there. Dill is just so intrigued by Boo Radley. He can't think of anything else. I wonder what he does in there, he murmured. Oh, he goes out all right, said Jem, when it's pitch dark. Miss Stephanie Crawford said she woke up in the middle of the night one time and saw him looking straight through the window at her. Said his head was like a skull looking at her. Ain't you ever waked up in the night and heard him, Dill? He walks like this. Jem slid his feet through the gravel. Why do you think Miss Rachel locks up so tight at night? I've seen his tracks in our backyard many a morning, and one night I heard him scratching on the back screen. But he was gone by the time Atticus got there. So here's somebody who's not been out at all, but now the superstitions are that he comes out at night. On page 13, also a little bit farther down, Jem, I wonder what he looks like, said Dill, and Jem gives a reasonable description. Tell me if this description of Boo Radley, Arthur Radley, sounds like it's reasonable. Okay? He says he's 6.5 feet tall, 6'6". Like, there's not a lot of people who are 6'6" now. Back in the 1930s, people were shorter than they are now. 6'6" would have been this towering giant. Okay, I think I read that most men, like a tall man, would be like 5'7", 5'8" in this time period. So, but Boo Radley is 6.5 feet tall, judging from his tracks. He dined on raw squirrels and any cats he could catch. That's why his hands were blood-stained. If you ate an animal raw, you could never wash the blood off. There was a long, jagged scar that ran across his face. What teeth he had were yellow and rotten. His eyes popped, and he drooled most of the time. Is this a reasonable explanation of what any 30-year-old man looks like? Like, Boo Radley's 35 years old. This is not what he looks like, but the kids make this up. They hear the stories from Miss Stephanie, the town gossip, and then they just build them on their own. So Dill says, let's try to make him come out. I'd like to see what he looks like. And we're going to have like 5, 6, 10 chapters all about the kids trying to make this adult man come out of his house. He hasn't been outside in 15 years. Why would he come out for the children? And the plans that they come up with are so funny. The first one is that Dill gives Jem a dare, which, of course, if you are a boy and you are given a dare, you have to go through with it. If we were in person right now, I would have you share some of those things that you've done that are really stupid, but you did them because you were dared. When you're given a dare, you got to go through with it. You got to save face. So Dill dares Jem to get Boo Radley to come out. All right. And Jem is scared. He doesn't want to do it. He's heard all these stories and he's like, he's going to come out. He's going to kill us. And so then, of course, just like kids would, Dill's like, oh, you're not going to do it because you're scared. And he's like, I'm not scared. I go past the Radley place every day. And Scout, here's your first characterization of Scout. Remember, she's 5. She's talking to her older brother in front of another boy. And she's like, he says, I go past the Radley place every day. And she goes, always running. Meaning you are scared. You run past that place. And that's one of the things that pushes him over the edge, because now even Scout is kind of goading him on and saying, oh, you're scared. You run past the place. And so finally, through a couple of other ways, they get him to do it. And finally, Dill says, all right, you don't have to like make him come out, I guess, but you have to touch the house. Here's the plan. You run up and touch the house, and he'll come out, and Scout and I'll jump on him, and we'll hold him down until we can tell him that we're not going to hurt him. Are a 5 and a 7-year-old going to be able to jump a grown man, a 35-year-old man, jump him and hold him down? No. If you think about it, it's just crazy, right? It's a stupid plan, but this is what their plan is. So they're supposed to wait for him to come out and jump on him, right? So finally, Jim goes up to the yard. He kind of hesitates, and finally he runs up and he smacks that house and he turns around and he runs like crazy. Dylan Scout don't wait to catch Boo Radley. Instead, they're running right behind Jim, and they run up onto their porch, and they get to their porch, and they're, breathing heavy, and they look back at the Radley house, and they see a freaky thing. And that freaky thing is that one of the shutters, one of the blinds inside the house goes flick, flick. Somebody has looked out of that house. Somebody looked out a window right in the direction of those kids. They looked, they closed it. And the kids are like, all right, so that's how chapter 1 ends. All right, so your homework for tonight is to read chapters 2 and 3. Again, you just got to get into the characters. You've got to get into the storyline and what's going on. Chapter 2 is pretty funny with Scout. She tries to help out one of her fellow classmates, but instead she just gets herself in trouble, and so that's what's going on there. I will send you a worksheet for chapters 2 and 3. Read it, fill out the worksheet. We'll talk about some stuff tomorrow. Tomorrow is a Google Meet, remember? So pop in sometime between 8 and 12, and you'll be able to ask me any questions that you have about chapters 1, 2, or 3. Have a good day.